Flexi-wings are the hot topic in F1 at the moment, and though the FIA were going to let them slide for this year, they've now decided that they're going to take action. We'll discuss why and what impact this could have in just a moment. Flexibility and aero-elasticity are almost inevitable in F1 as the engineers look to get the most from the regulations, but it's up to the FIA to police this and set a boundary for where the teams can get to. They do this through the technical regulations, but also through documents called technical directives that aim to give the FIA and the teams a common understanding of where the line lies. While they can then check whether the teams have stuck to this boundary through static load tests, the FIA also often introduce other methods through these technical directives that they can use to check whether the teams are sticking within the amount of permitted flex, even if they're passing these load tests. The load tests in the garage will never fully replicate the loads the cars are under on track, and so the FIA go through other methods like putting dots on the rear and front wings so they can check the flex on the onboard video cameras. They sometimes ask the teams to submit their front and rear wing designs to them, or they can make the tests more stringent, and this is what they're proposing to do this year. A new modified version of TD18 that was first introduced in 2021 will be brought in from the Spanish Grand Prix this year, and it will see the amount of inboard flex on the front wing reduced by 1mm and the outboard flex reduced by 5. So what's led up to this point, and why are the FIA acting now after saying they wouldn't for so long? In early 2024 we saw two main teams begin to exploit flexibility to address inherent issues with their cars that would cause understeer at low speed and oversteer at high speed, but there were likely also others as the year went on. These ground effect cars are difficult to balance. If you add too much downforce on, then they can oversteer at high speeds, but if you take too much downforce off, then they understeer at low speeds. So the ideal solution would let you keep some downforce on for the corners, but take some off for the straight, making the car more predictable to drive. This can be done mechanically through front wing flap adjustments, but these are static around the lap. Flexibility in the front wing would allow the flap angle to reduce at high speed down the straights, but maintain a more aggressive angle at low speeds in the corners, addressing this issue over the whole lap. Mercedes were potentially one of the first teams to introduce flexibility to overcome this problem in their car, potentially doing so in an upgrade in Monaco to their front wing that transformed their performance. It's no secret that they struggled with the balance of their car more so than any other team, and they suffered major porpoising at the beginning of the regulations, and were still struggling with their car being more nervous at high speed last year. Mercedes' initial wing for the 2024 season was quite unique. It had a very thin inboard section, which got wider outboard to improve the airflow to the floor either side of the nose and counteract rear instability. But with this came a lack of load on the front in slower corners, creating understeer. The Monaco wing changes were seemingly a different way of addressing the same problem, and Andrew Shovlin said it not only delivered performance but also a benefit in terms of how the car felt. Both signs that it was a better route to go down. They never explicitly said that they used flexibility to do this, but the fact that James Allison at the time more broadly spoke to the benefits that flexibility can bring, and if you look at the specific ways that this helped their car, then it seems to point to the fact that flexibility was the direction they went in. McLaren were the other team who may have capitalised on flexibility in their Miami upgrade, which helped address problems they'd had to that point of a lack of top speed and difficulty in longer, faster corners. The front wing they introduced in Miami clearly helped, as it gave them the fastest car in the field that weekend and helped Lando Norris challenge for his maiden win, and so they doubled down on this development direction in an upgrade in Austria 5 races later. Andrea Stella said they hoped this upgrade would deliver some low-speed benefits, but without affecting the high speed or straight line too negatively. Again, no mention was explicitly made to this being done through flexibility, but these are the exact aims of having flexibility in your bodywork. It wasn't just the front wings in 2024 though, as McLaren's rear wing came under fire later in the season for looking like it flexed at high speeds in Baku, and so it became known as the mini DRS effect. Though this was noticed in Baku, the low drag rear wing it came from had been brought in Belgium and used there, and later on in Monza, meaning by the time the FIA reportedly asked them to make changes to it, their rivals were all too aware of the fact that the benefit had already been maximised. Even so, to avoid any further issues, McLaren made changes to their full suite of rear wings in Austin, and they noted in their statement that while they were the ones in the spotlight, they also hoped that the FIA would take a look at other rear wings in the field, perhaps pointing to the fact that they weren't the only ones using technology like this. So with all of this and possibly more happening in 2024, how did the FIA react at the time? In response to there potentially being more flexi wings in the field, the FIA began to monitor them more closely from the Belgian Grand Prix, though it should be noted that this was just to monitor and not to regulate. Even so, they said that everyone's front wings were legal, which gave other teams the green light they'd been waiting for to go away and develop their own versions of these wings, especially for teams like Ferrari and Red Bull who'd been reluctant to up to that point. They also made changes to the 2025 regulations to cover off the rear wing grey area that McLaren had supposedly used to create their mini DRS, but at no point were changes made to the front wing regulations, and the FIA even said at the end of the year that no changes would be made into 2025. But now this stance has changed, and there are a few theories as to why. One is that it could be McLaren who lobbied for these changes, after they became aware that Ferrari or Red Bull might catch them this year if they were also allowed to use these wings. Another is that smaller teams protested this development direction, as it can be expensive both financially and in terms of time. Everything that happens like this in F1 is very political in nature, and no team is ever going to come forward and say it was them who lobbied for changes, so we'll likely never know the real reason. But what's important to look at now is the potential impact of this TD itself, but also of the timing of this U-turn for the teams and for the championship itself. Given that the FIA initially gave the green light for this development direction, it's likely that a lot of teams went down this route through the winter and may now have wasted money and time which is valuable in the cost cap era. While the front runners and bigger teams will likely look to optimise the use of a flexi-wing for the first 8 races, and then make changes for the rest of the year, for smaller teams they may have to make the choice between prioritising the first 8 races or the second longer phase of the year. You could therefore say that the aim of this TD to ensure a level playing field could be opposite to its effects in practice. The timing of this TD as mid-season may also impact teams' 2026 development, as they'll have to move resource away from this and back towards 2025 to ensure they're being compliant with the regulations from the 9th race onwards. Most of these potential effects could have been avoided had the FIA announced the change at the end of the 2024 season with a first race start date, giving the teams the longer adaptation time, but without the potential effects this might have on the championship order. Of course, there still would have been cost cap and development concerns, but the impact of these might have been lesser. Above all else though, these situations, and ones that are similar in the past, serve to remind us just how competitive F1 is. Teams will always argue about each other's cars, especially as the competition gets tougher and the field gets tighter. History also tells us that it will take more than a technical directive to stop flexi wings being a point of contention this year. Of course, we'll be bringing you all of the analysis pre and post these changes, and looking at their impact over the year on our social channels, at Motorsport by Apex, which you can check out in the description of this video. But for now, thank you for watching. Please consider liking this video if you enjoyed this deep dive, and subscribe to Apex for more of the same.